So today we're really happy to welcome Kevin Rowling. Kevin is a forestry research technician with University of Illinois Extension Forestry, and he's based at the Dixon Springs Ag Center. So we're excited for you to share your expertise with us today, Kevin. So welcome, and I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Erin. And thank you all for joining us on this lovely day. It's really windy out there where I'm at today. I don't know about you all, but I believe we're actually under a red flag warning today because of the high winds and the low humidity. So not a great day to be burning, at least not down here. But yeah, just to give you a little bit more background. So I've been here with Illinois Extension Forestry for about 5 years now and have a variety of experiences with prescribed fire, ranging from regional land trusts up to national agencies and organizations for the last, I don't know, 15 or so years. So today, just to walk you through what we're going to talk about, we're going to talk briefly about why we burn, and spoiler alert, it can vary quite a bit. Really depends on a lot of factors on the site and landowner objectives or the land manager, and any number of things. But then we're going to kind of go through the whole sequence of actions that have to take place for someone or some group to execute a burn. So starting with permits, leading into the burn plan, site preparations, all the different notifications, weather monitoring, the day of burn preparations, all the way through kind of actually executing the fire itself, starting with a test fire, ignition, holding, mop-up, and after action review and post-burn report. And then we're going to close out the talk with some information about training and more information, because this is an incredibly complex topic. And we're going to barely scratch the surface here, although I hope to give you a pretty in-depth understanding as well at the same time. So why and where do we burn? So we burn lots of different places for many different reasons. Largely, it has to do with maintaining fire-adapted ecosystems. So this includes prairies, forests, glades, barrens, and even some wetlands. A big reason we burn here in forested areas in the Midwest is to help maintain oak dominance in the overstory. And that has a number of benefits, some of which I highlighted here in some recent article titles here. So like Litter to Glitter, promoting herbaceous ground cover. Also, it aids in promoting conditions for regeneration of oak trees and maintaining a more open understory. They require a greater amount of sunlight, so fire can help with that. It can also improve wildlife habitat in a variety of situations, can provide a greater diversity of plants and animals in some systems. And depending on your location and the surroundings of your area, you can use fire to help develop more of a mosaic of habitats that can in turn help in increasing diversity of species across the landscape scale. And finally, if you have pasture areas, fire can help improve forage, benefiting some grasses for cattle and things of that nature. So here's just an image of a high quality prairie restoration up in northern Illinois. And some of the reasons you'd burn in this type of area would be to prevent woody species from overtaking. It also helps release nutrients into the soil, can lead to soil warming faster in the springtime, which in turn can help some of the vegetation in this system. Some species in prairies and also in forests can be cued to germinate following fire. And using fire at different times can lead to favoring different species or different groups of species. So broadly speaking, prairie fires in the fall will have greater benefit for wildflowers and forbs, whereas if you conducted a prairie fire in the springtime, that tends to favor better for the tall grasses. So in a more forested situation, here we have a slide that kind of shows a demonstration forest we have here at Dixon Springs Ag Center. And so within this demonstration forest, we divided it into 4 blocks. One is a control where no forest management has been conducted. One is a forest block where only thinning was conducted. You can see that here in the top right. And you can see there's quite a bit of saplings and shrubby growth coming in under these trees that were left standing. We also have a burn only section. So you can see we do have some evidence of fire. You can see a lot of maples in the mid-story that are kind of shading out the understory, so you don't get a lot of ground cover vegetation, whereas you did have quite a bit in the thin only. And then if you look here in the bottom right, we have a section of the demonstration forest that is both thinned and burned. And you can see the results of this are a more open understory in terms of woody vegetation, but there's also quite a bit of herbaceous vegetation, and that can be good for flowering plants there on the ground level and helps improve habitat for pollinators, also allows for that extra light that oak species need to regenerate, and a number of other benefits. So this is kind of an interesting demo of different types of forest management that includes fire. And even some wetlands burn periodically, especially wet prairies and sedge meadows. We have a picture here of a wet prairie situation. And unfortunately, this wet prairie has been largely taken over by reed canary grass. You can see that's all pretty uniform grass through there. And that's actually another reason that we could burn in terms of managing invasive plants. So in some cases, fire can lead to increases or decreases depending on the species and the timing, or it could serve as a preparatory action. So in a site like this, in this picture with reed canary grass, it could be helpful for fire to burn off all that duff layer. And then in the springtime, you might use an alternative control method, such as a grass-specific herbicide treatment to treat the resprouts without having all that duff layer kind of blocking your spray from reaching the new growth. So there's a whole suite of different reasons that we burn, and it depends a lot on the site. Up next, we're going to do a short section on personal protective equipment, tools, and different equipment that you might see on the fire line. So in terms of your personal protective equipment, most places will require some form of fire-resistant clothing, such as Nomex, and pretty much everything you want to be wearing is going to be fire-resistant to some extent. So all leather boots, leather gloves. You also need a fire helmet, and then optional PPE includes goggles, a shroud, which is actually what I have kind of draped over my helmet here. You can drop that down and it would wrap around your face. If there's a real intense fire next to your control line, that can be pretty useful. And then some folks like to wear a face mask as well, like a respirator. It helps to cut down on breathing in the particles that rise from the smoke from the fire. And in general, you never want to wear any synthetic fabrics, such as polyester that can melt, and that includes any socks or undergarments. Up next, we have a drip torch. There's a number of different styles, but basically, the drip torch fuel is a combination usually of diesel and gasoline, and with that combination, it doesn't burn off right away like pure gasoline would, and it's not as intense as pure gasoline. So it lasts a little bit longer. It helps to get the fuels within the burn unit caught. And yeah, so basically you'd use that around the perimeter of the burn. Another pretty common tool that you might find on the fire line is a flapper. And contrary to the name of this, you don't really want to flap it around too much. Or another name people like to call it is a swatter, and you also don't want to use it as a swatting tool. You want to use it more like you're using a mop. So you kind of move it side to side without really lifting it off of the ground too much. That's going to help you to prevent any sparks from flying around, and you're actually going to smother out that fire with that tool. Another nice tool to have on the fire line, especially in forested situations, is a collapsible rake. So these fold down just to about a 3 foot or so, and you can easily carry that with you, even if you're carrying some other tool like a drip torch. And then you also will have that extra tool to maybe pull the leaves out from around a dead tree that you don't want to catch fire, and maybe they missed while doing the preparation work for the fire unit. Another tool that is a little less common, but I like, it's called the McLeod. So you can see it has sort of a rake on one side, and then the other side is more of a hoe with a sharp chopping edge. So you can use that to get through kind of smaller woody vegetation that might be in the way that you want to remove. This is another pretty common fire line tool. Most people either call it a fire rake, or you might hear people call it a council rake. And it has those kind of sharp tines. So this is good for clearing both leaves and brush and small stems. Small woody stems can be cut with those sharp teeth. And I believe this is the last tool I have, the Pulaski. So it has a couple different cutting options. And this tool I really like for the mop-ups, or sort of the end of the fire where you're going around and trying to make sure everything that's kind of smoldering is put out. This helps to break up those kind of punky, heavy woods that might still be burning at the end of the fire. Another really useful tool is a leaf blower. So a leaf blower can be used in fire line preparation, which is what people are doing in both of these pictures. So they're basically clearing the leaf and other woody debris down to bare mineral soil. So that serves as the fire break. But you can also use this on the day of a burn, and you actually use it to sort of snuff out a fire, especially in sort of a grassland type situation. It's kind of like blowing out a candle. But you do want to make sure you have the right direction when you're doing something like that, and make sure you're blowing any sparks interior to your burn unit, and not in the outside of the burn unit where you don't want it to catch fire. That can get tricky. Kind of getting up into larger equipment, but this is another very common tool that you'll see on the fire line. UTVs or side-by-sides with some sort of skid sprayer. There are a lot of different versions of this, but this is an invaluable tool that really helps make things more efficient and more safe for executing prescribed burns. So you can use this to either put out like these creeping fires that are kind of working their way into the control line. So this guy on this UTV could maybe come back around and squirt these out. That way the fire front is away from your control line and all of the fire along the control line is put out. Or you can use it to lay down what's called a wet line. And I think that's what happened in this case, where the person on this UTV sprayed some water right along this edge. And then as the fire backs into that wet line, it puts itself out. So these little flames will actually put themselves out once they reach that quote unquote wet line. So really useful tool, one that you'll see on most fires today, at least in the Midwest. Executing a burn. So with that, we're going to kind of get into some of the nitty gritty. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on certifications, but if anyone has any questions about this, I'd be happy to answer it. In Illinois, we have what's called a certified prescribed burn manager certification, and this was created as part of the Illinois Prescribed Burn Act. This helps to ensure that burn managers have a minimum level of training and experience, and also helps with some potential liability aspects to prescribed burning. And anybody who wants to learn more about that, I have links there to a couple of documents related to that. Another group that does a lot of the training and coordination of training for prescribed fire and wildland fire practitioners is called the National Wildfire Coordinating Group. And they provide a interagency certification structure. So people with all the different federal agencies like U.S. Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife, the Park Service, they can all come together on a wildfire potentially, or even a prescribed fire in some cases, and they can work together under this structure. And there's not different terminologies or different specifications for different qualifications. We all kind of can understand what these different qualifications are and what kind of experience each person has on the fire line through the system. So most people have this bare minimum is called an FFT2 or firefighter type 2, and that includes taking the kind of first couple courses in the series known as 130, 190, and a lot of that is kind of available online if anybody's interested in checking it out. In addition to taking the classes, then there's also usually a field day where you go through a certain level of kind of practice, and then also there is a physical fitness test as well. So anyone who wants to get this IQ card or instant qualification card, red card, and wants to go fight wildfires out west, you would have to also get this arduous physical fitness test, which basically is walking 3 miles in 45 minutes with 45 pounds on your back. So I want to make sure you're in good enough shape and can keep up with the group as well. So that's kind of the main certification and training routes that people go through. There are a few different permit concerns with prescribed fire. The main one statewide is the Illinois EPA open burning permit, which is pretty straightforward. You do have to pretty much go through snail mail for that. And you do want to submit that in advance of when you hope to conduct a burn, because it can take a couple months sometimes for that to go through. But it is relatively straightforward and pretty easy to get. Local permits are going to differ by region and locality. Some municipalities will require it if you're in a town or a city, especially up around the Chicagoland area, and some others. And also in southernmost Illinois, we have a kind of unique permit that is only in a couple of counties down here, specific to, I believe it's Pope and Hardin County, and then Cook County also has a specific open burning permit, and there may be others depending on your region. There's an example of the Pope County specific permit. So up next is the burn plan. So this is going to be the document that sort of guides what happens on the burn. And this is to be completed only by qualified persons. But if you're curious to see more about what goes into it, you can check out these templates I have links to here. It can vary somewhat by agency and organization, what they'd like to see in the burn plan. But in general, it has a lot of the same information. What type of fuels or vegetation are going to be burned? How much smoke do you think might be produced? Are there nearby smoke sensitive facilities or roadways that you want to avoid putting smoke on? Things of that nature. There's a fair amount of information that can go into those plans. So other things you might consider could include topography. What if there's a preferred ignition sequence? What are the timings that are going to be most beneficial to achieving your objectives? A whole suite of things, really. And it's really going to depend on the site itself. So in terms of preparing a site, this can differ between different fuel types. And so I'm going to go through a few slides here on different types of fire breaks that you might use depending on the type of burn unit you have. So in any unit, you could have existing roads, regularly mowed yards, or water bodies. In open land situations, you would typically use mowing and clearing of the dead fuels, or possibly disking or tilling or wetlining. In forested situations, you would typically use leaf blowing and raking, and clearing or avoiding heavies or large dead limbs and things of that nature. So a roadway such as pictured here could be pretty good. You can see there's still a fair number of leaves, so you might still leaf blow this roadway if you were going to use that as a fire break, and then obviously clear that fallen limb off. Smaller streams, if you're going to use a smaller stream, that can be okay, but it should be checked to make sure there's no continuous fuels, like a little patch of leaves, dead leaves that might have caught on a tree branch across the stream. You want to make sure that's broken up so that there's no continuous fuels. So here's an example of a really good burn break here. You can see it's like a 2-track road and it's down to bare mineral soil, and even outside of the track of the tires, it's really short grass. There's not much that can burn in there. So that would be a pretty good break. Whoops. This one's not as good because you can see there's quite a bit of dead grass in here, and there's some leaves. This fire could back into this burn break, but you can see we have personnel here. They may have already put down a wet line, and it could burn up to that wet spot and put itself out. But you also have another person on foot with a flapper or a rake. So they're well within reason of putting this out as it kind of backs towards this control line. You can see they probably have already done this section. You can see how it's put out. There's a little bit of fire there, but it's kind of just smoldering. So they're working this next section, and they'll piece it together as they move along. Here's another really great burn break if you have it. Here's another one that you might think is pretty bomb-proof, but actually it did have some spot fires on the other side of this road this day. That's because the fuels that were on in the burn unit, this was largely Phragmites, which is a really tall grass and can reach flame heights of sometimes 30 feet in height. So we actually did have some spot fires on this other side. So not always the case, and a lot of times different sites will have different characteristics that you need to account for. Here's the Cache River. Pretty good burn break there. Don't think that's going anywhere. This was another interesting case. This is up in northern Illinois, a place called Kite River Bottoms. Train track could be a pretty good fire break. A lot of bare mineral rock that won't burn, of course, but then when the train came through, you do have to concern yourself with the possibility of that wind from that train kind of kicking a spark up over here. And that actually happened to a previous burn crew at this site. And that's why we have a couple folks stationed on the other side. When we heard that train coming, we had a couple people go over there just in case a spark went over to the other side so they could put it out. In open lands more generally, so a lot of times we'll just do a mowed line around the edge of the unit. Infrequently mowed areas and areas with leaf litter should also be cleared. So even after you mow, you might need to leaf blow or use a mulching mower or something to get rid of like this dead grass that's going to be laying there, because that can easily catch fire and move across the burn break. Generally, you want to keep the grass pretty short in these mowed breaks, about 3 inches or less. And the rule of thumb here is that you want the control line to be 3 times the flame height or 3 times as wide as the height of the nearest vegetation or fuels. So in this case, we've got some probably 4 foot or so grass. So you'd want that to be around 12 or 15 foot wide. So you might need to make 2 or 3 passes with a mower like this for it to be a sufficient width. So a mowed line like this could be supplemented with a wet line, but you do have to factor in that could use up some water resources for your skid sprayer. So you want to keep that in mind. So here's kind of a double wide burned path around this grass unit. You can see there's some of that grass clippings that we want to get rid of. You can essentially use a leaf blower to get it down to bare mineral soil. There's still some grass in this area even after being leaf blown, but you can see bare mineral soil, and a fire is going to have a lot harder time creeping through this than it would through this image on the left, where there's quite a bit more dead grass in there. So you can still use your UTV and a skid sprayer, or you can use somebody with a flapper to come in and just smother out any fire that tries creeping through that control line. The next step up might be disking, tilling, or plowing. So breaking up that soil around the edge of your grass unit is another possibility. So you might use a disc. You might need a more aggressive bite on your disc, depending on the size of your equipment and the soils. You want to get it down to that bare mineral soil. And again, even with disking, you might still have to leaf blow. The next step up might be to till, and this will get you down to bare mineral soil. That's basically a rototiller there on the back of that tractor. So that's pretty smooth and pretty low chance of a fire getting across there, except with maybe wind-blown embers. Other people I've seen use plows on occasion. With plowing, it can create kind of really pretty big dirt clods and can be difficult for crew to get around. So it's not my preferred method, but it can be quite effective. With that, we're going to jump into some forest understory fire breaks. So in the forest, it's quite a bit different from a pasture or grassland situation. But again, the rule of thumb your fire line or your control line should be at least 3 times as wide as the height of the nearest surface vegetation. So if you think about most forests, hardwood forests in particular, you're going to have a layer of leaf litter, and that's what you're burning off essentially in these prescribed burns in forests in our area. And so it really doesn't have to be all that wide. 4 or 5 feet for extenuating circumstances. We usually use about 3 feet, but it can vary somewhat depending on the leaf litter and other factors you might have. If there's topography, if there's heavier litter for some reason, you might want to widen it out a little farther. You can also use rakes to do kind of the same job, and you might need to do both. You can see there's quite a few kind of vines in here. For the most part, those aren't going to burn up, but there might be cases where there's sticks or other things that you can't quite get with the leaf blower. You might need to rake up. So here's a couple examples of that, kind of just a few feet fire break in this forested situation. You can see the fires kind of pulling away. Just some other examples here, pretty narrow, not a whole lot needed in most forest situations. Another consideration when you're prepping your site for a burn are snags or standing dead trees. And basically, you want to either clear the litter around the base of those trees if you want to keep them, or you need to cut them down and get them on the ground. Because it's pretty challenging to deal with a tree that's on fire and dead. It can be pretty challenging to deal with a tree that's just standing dead. But when it's on fire, that adds a whole nother level of danger. And you can't really leave a burning, standing dead tree when you're ready to go at the end of the day. You're going to need that tree on the ground and put out so that it doesn't throw sparks outside of your burn unit. And you want to avoid situations like this, where you have to cut those standing burning trees. So here's just a real brief example of just a bunch of debris around a standing dead tree snag, just pulling all that dead bark and leaves around it, and that should keep it from catching fire. You don't want to, a lot of times you want to keep these standing dead trees. These are great for wildlife, for a suite of birds and insects. So you generally want to try to keep those standing if you can. Another consideration could be jackpot fuels. So this is a situation where we had a whole cluster of trees that kind of fell over right next to where we wanted to put our fire line. This is our fire line here with the arrow. And normally what we would do is we would probably go around this and put our fire line in a slightly different position. But because this was part of our demonstration forest, we wanted to maintain that boundary between the burn units. So we basically cut up all these down trees and kind of get them on the ground so that even if they catch fire, they're not going to send sparks up into the air. With that, kind of just a bit about notification. So if you are conducting a fire, you want to notify adjacent landowners and occupants. You want to talk to the local fire departments well in advance. The county dispatcher, generally, you would notify kind of the day of the fire. And just so if and when passersby might call it in, that they're aware that you're conducting a fire and that it's more or less under control, and that if they have concerns, they know that they can call you and make sure that everything is still all right. So if they have members of the public that are concerned, they can check on that and make sure all is well. In southernmost Illinois, with the Shawnee National Forest, we have an Illinois Interagency Dispatch Center. So they have fire crews kind of standing by. And so that's another call you need to make down in this region so that they're aware of what you're doing. You also need to notify and request potential crew members. This is going to vary quite a bit depending on the agency or organization. And in general, if you're a private landowner, you should do these contact efforts in collaboration with a burn association if you're affiliated with one. Another significant factor is the weather, pretty obviously. So when you're planning for a burn, when I'm planning for a burn, I pretty obsessively am monitoring the weather, looking for kind of the right humidity and wind speed and direction for the different burn units that we might have planned. And so there's a few different resources online through the National Weather Service that you can get fire weather information, so you can get pretty specific information to your area if you follow some of these links that I have here. And you can generate some pretty nifty things here, like this graph. I really like these graphs on burn days because it kind of shows you the trends visually and what's going to happen both throughout your burn day and then even in the following days. If you might have concerns about some heavy materials maybe burning overnight, or if you might have neighbors that have smoke concerns that might last into the next day, you can kind of see what's going to happen. So this has your wind speed and direction, your heat index, temperature kind of throughout the day. You can see where it's going to peak. Your relative humidity is a huge factor when you're doing a burn. And you can kind of monitor that and what it's going to do throughout the day. Really neat tool to check out. And then there's also this text fire weather forecast as well. So there's another link here to another Weather Service page that kind of gives a textual explanation for what's going to happen in the next several days for your area. So it has kind of what's going to happen today in this one column, tonight, and then the next day, and then even kind of a longer term broad forecast after that. But it gives you the temperatures, humidities, then the winds near ground level, but then also the transport winds, like what's going to happen once it gets up higher into the atmosphere. And that can be a significant factor if you're in more urban areas or if you have smoke sensitive areas nearby, and something you want to consider. So for the day of burn, you might also need to make more communications. So those dispatches, you're going to want to call the day of the burn, and then possibly the local fire department. Hopefully you will have had discussions with the local fire department prior to the day of the burn, and they will let you know whether or not they would want you to notify them on the day of. So you might have other sensitive neighbors or facilities that you need to notify. On the fire line communications, radios can be an issue. Batteries and compatibility. This is less of an issue as it has been in the past, but sometimes you get on a burn and you have multiple different agencies and organizations, and there can be some compatibility issues between different radios. Phones can be great. It's preferred in a lot of cases to use a radio, because then a lot of people on the fire line are going to hear that information and be aware of what's happening. Whereas on a phone, you're just talking with one person. And down here in southernmost Illinois, especially, that can be an issue with connectivity. And then communication can also be a factor with your map. So hopefully you have a a burn unit map that shows kind of where all the corners are. So I like to letter the corners approximately so that when people communicate, they have an idea of where the different crews might be or where different individuals are on the burn unit. You also have kind of major roadways. So here's the highway. You have the Dixon Springs office up here. Locations for people to get water for sprayers. So they might have to go up to this pond or go up to the office for water. Maps can be a great communication tool. So once you've done all that and you're getting close to ready to start a fire, you would round up your crew, review the go, no go checklist. There's a few different versions of that, but here's sort of an example of the types of questions you would ask yourself before initiating that burn. Are the conditions favorable? You have the crew that you need. All the resources have been checked. Everyone knows what they're doing. Escape routes and safety zones have been identified. Pre-burn considerations have been completed or addressed. Notifications, permits, clearances, all of the above. If then all of that is okay, then you would proceed with the test fire. And so with that, we're going to kind of walk through what's called a ring fire. And this is one of the probably most frequently used kind of techniques for executing a fire, where you essentially the entire perimeter of the burn unit is ignited. So you start at the downwind side, and you oftentimes will split into two crews and go each direction, kind of clockwise and counterclockwise, but not always. And I'm going to go through an example where you only had start out with one crew and then split into two. But the general idea is that you start on that downwind side and you light what's called a backing fire. So the fire on the downwind side is going to have a harder time kind of working its way into the wind versus if you were to light what's called a head fire, where basically you light the fire with the wind and the wind pushes the fire and creates a much higher flame heights and moves much faster. But I'll describe that in a little more detail in the following slides. So as you're lighting this backing fire on the far side of the unit, you're actually expanding what's called the black. So the burned area, it's not going to run fire through it a second time. So you're actually kind of expanding your control line on that side of the burn unit by creating more black. So burned area is not going to reburn itself generally. So once you have that backfire and the width of your black is wide enough that you feel like you're pretty safe on that side, then you can start lighting the sides or the flanks. And then finally, you might be able to light a head fire on the far side of the unit that goes with the wind, because you'll have enough black behind it that it won't matter if those flames are much higher. But hopefully these next couple slides will explain that a little bit in greater detail. So I have a series of slides here that I took with our drone, and it's just going to kind of show the whole process here. So we have the arrow here showing the wind direction on the far side of this field. We have our crew here lined up, ready to go. And they have already done their crew assignments, and they're ready to check for a test fire to see if the conditions are appropriate for continuing. So everything looks all right from this point, and it's behaving as they think it should, so they're going to proceed. And what they're going to do is, instead of having one crew go one way and another go the other, they're actually both going to follow on this along this control line because they don't want the fire to get into this unit here to the left. So they're going to use all their resources to make sure that doesn't catch over here. So you can see now the igniter with the drip torch has proceeded a little ways down the field. You can see this black starting to burn in, and there's less concern. So there's fewer resources back here where there's more black in addition to the control line. And this is sort of progressing further. More black here where they started. More black. They're still not fully sure that there's not going to be a spark crossover. So you can see this four-wheeler is going back to check this line and make sure nothing got over. You can see quite a bit of black starting to show up there where they started, and they've moved quite a bit of ways down into the field. Oops. So they stationed one guy over here, but now pretty much nobody's patrolling over here because look at all this burned area. There's really very little chance of any spark kind of getting into that field now. So all the holding crew resources have kind of moved up to where it's more narrow and there where the igniter is, where there's less black. So you can see now, basically they've left that whole backside because it's all blackened in, and all their resources are stationed kind of where the edge of the fire meets the control lines. And they're starting to light the flank fires on the sides. So these flanking fires are going to start to kind of push towards the middle while the backing fire continues backing into the wind. More flank fire, and they're lighting a little bit of a head fire. Whoops. So you can see here the wind shifted probably a little bit. You probably had a little bit of a wind gust pushing from that other side, and this is a little bit more of a head fire. So it's burning with the wind behind it, pushing it into the fuels. And here you can see the flank fire on both sides and the backing fire. So now they started to light a head fire here. So they have plenty of black. They're not worried about the taller flame heights, more intense flame, because it's just going to hit this huge black area. And there you have it. So that was a ring fire. And that's a pretty basic, almost a square grass field. It varies in complexity, but that's kind of the general idea on most of our burns. And you can get into pretty serious complexity with multiple crews, tens of firefighters, and varied topography. Really depends on the site. So then once it's rung, you proceed with the mop-up. Mop-up is going to be pretty minimal on a prairie site versus a forested site. Forested sites, you have to concern yourself with heavies or these larger logs that might smolder for a long time and could be an issue for sending sparks outside of your burn unit. So you do want to make sure that those are put out or so far interior that they're not going to be a problem. So basically in mop-up, that's what happens. Crews patrol the edge of the burn units and seek out any of those types of issues and then deal with them either through extinguishing with water, hitting them with or moving them farther interior and felling, or getting smoldering snags and other woody debris on the ground. And basically you're just trying to put it out so that it's safe for the crew to leave. Some additional considerations with prescribed fire are invasive plants. And I am going to share a link at the end. I have a whole nother talk that is specific to invasive plants and fire if you're interested in greater detail. But generally, you want to pre-treat in advance, preferably regularly. And you want to plan to react to different species that might increase and spread because of fire. Some will increase, some will decrease. It really depends on the species. Sometimes it even depends on the timing. So a species that burns in the spring might decrease, but if you had that same burn in the fall, it might increase, and vice versa. It all is pretty variable, but there are some general guidelines and some specifics to different species. So in general, some of the spreaders that you might have on a fire would be Japanese chaff flower, Japanese stillgrass, or garlic mustard, and those would spread just kind of based on the activities that are being conducted on a fire, moving equipment around. Chaff flower, I'll show on another slide, that sticks to your clothing potentially and could get moved around that way. And then there are some likely increasers such as stillgrass, ceresia, tree of heaven, oriental bittersweet. Basically, you want to focus on control lines and priority species. So here's some of those spreading plants that I mentioned. Power washing vehicles and equipment before moving between sites can be huge. If you know you have one invasive at one site, make sure you're doing your best to prevent that spread. Clean footwear of dirt that may carry seeds, and check for clothing of Japanese chaff flower seeds. This is especially true in Southern Illinois, but this one's moving pretty fast, and it won't be long probably until folks in other parts of the state are going to be seeing this one as well. But this one has two little barbs and it attaches to your clothing. Here's a pretty bad invasion of Japanese chaff flower on both sides of this trail. So it can be spread by animal fur as well as people. There's sort of the dead stems that looks like over winter. Following up can be critical for some invasive species after fire. I don't know how many people are familiar with this one. This one's oriental bittersweet. It tends to root sprout pretty heavily after being cut, or in this case, being top killed by fire. So these larger vines that were crawling up the edges of this forest stand were top killed by fire, and then it sent out a ton of these root sprouts. And it looks pretty bad. This could actually be an opportunity to set it back if you came through with a foliar spray on these resprouts, and you could do quite a number on these resprouts and potentially really reduce the population that way, as long as you did the follow-up. If you miss the follow-up, then it's probably going to be worse than what it was before the fire. Another important step is the post-burn report and monitoring. So always take records of the burn and the burn day itself, how it went, how much of the site proportionally burned, and whether the intensity was sufficient to achieve your objectives, things of that nature. So as promised, here's a number of links. I can share a PDF of this presentation so you don't have to try writing all this stuff down. I can send you a link or a file of the PDF of this. But so those NWCG trainings, the Chicago Wilderness has a really great burn crew training program. The Illinois Prescribed Fire Council has a lot of good information and so on. And with that, you don't want to end up like this. And so make sure you always get well trained or have someone that's well trained to assist. And here's a couple additional links that I mentioned: invasive plants and fire, and effects of prescribed fire on vegetation and wildlife, that I have up on YouTube as well. And then in closing, we have the next Everyday Environment presentation November 10th on building better soils. So with that, I will take any questions if we have time.
Great. Thank you so much, Kevin, for sharing all of that wonderful information. And I especially really enjoyed the drone pictures, and we've had some other comments in the chat that was really helpful to see. So thank you.
Great.